Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm Orlando Ruiz Jr., and welcome to another classic movie review. This is my review of a classic martial arts film from 1973, directed by Robert Clouse, starring the legendary Bruce Lee. The name of the film is Enter the Dragon. Before this movie came out, Bruce Lee was already known in Hong Kong for a few films, movies like Fist of Fury and The Way of the Dragon, also known as Return of the Dragon. And very sadly, this would be his first big Hollywood production, but also his last. And it's famously reported and known to many of his fans that in July of 1973, Bruce Lee passed away, and this movie would premiere just a month later in August of 1973. Had Bruce Lee not been taken from us at the very young age of 32, there's no doubt in my mind he would have been a major force in Hollywood. But Enter the Dragon further cemented his legacy after his passing. He'd only made a few movies, and yet his influence still carried on through the 70s into the 80s, and to this day, it's very much felt in a lot of the martial arts movies that we see even nowadays. The release and the success of this movie would help to make the martial arts genre very popular, further cementing its place in the action genre to the point where just a year after this movie, we had a Bond movie with The Man with the Golden Gun, where there's an entire section of that movie that feels very much like it's taken out of Enter the Dragon, with Bond waking up in this temple and there's a bunch of guys in karate gis and he has to fight his way out of this temple using martial arts. Speaking of the Bond movies, one can't deny when watching Enter the Dragon that there is quite a bit of influence of the early Bond movies in Enter the Dragon, since the main villain, Han, played by Shi Qian, has a deformity, much like many of the villains in the Bond films, and also is dressed like a Bond villain, very much in the style of like Dr. No, and he also has a white cat at some point and he walks with it, stroking it a bit. At the very beginning of the film, we see Bruce Lee in a match demonstrating his skills for us, the audience, and he's going up against another very legendary actor in a very brief but fun appearance by Sammo Hung. And after this fun little scene, we see the introduction of a character called Braithwaite, who is the guy that gives Bruce Lee his mission for the film. And in the film, Bruce Lee is just called Lee, and it's one of the few times that you'll see in a movie Bruce Lee using his actual voice, unlike in his Hong Kong films where it's dubbed in Mandarin. And Bruce Lee is very good and very underrated as an actor, I think. And the martial arts genre gets a bit of flack for bad acting from time to time in many of the early martial arts movies. But as an actor, I think Bruce Lee was very solid, and it really demonstrates his skills as an actor throughout this movie. There's even one scene where we get to see him tear up a bit in a scene where he learns a very sad truth about his sister. Lee's mission in the film is to infiltrate a mysterious island that is owned by an ex-monk, Shaolin monk, that is an ex-pupil of his teacher. And fans of the classic 1988 Jean-Claude Van Damme film Bloodsport will recognize that teacher as the same man who taught Van Damme in that film. Shidoshi was the guy's name in that movie. Sorry, I'm blanking on the actor's name, but yeah, he looks a lot younger here, just made up to play an older character with, like a white beard and a white wig and stuff. But it's very clearly the same actor. You can tell by the voice and everything. The movie also co-stars John Saxon in the role of Roper. You have Jim Kelly in the role of Williams. Very shortly after this movie, Jim Kelly would go on to gain his own following as an action star in the martial arts genre with movies like Black Belt Jones and Three the Hard Way. And he is very good in this movie. He's a lot of fun to watch. He has one of my favorite lines in the movie when he tells the main villain that he's straight out of a comic book. Classic moment in this movie. And it's cool to see these characters interact with each other when they're on this boat on their way to the island, when they're on the voyage. It's told very much in flashback about their situations that got them to the point where they had to take this trip. So we get a little bit of everybody's personality in those flashbacks. The Williams character, played by Jim Kelly, and the Roper character, played by John Saxon, seem to have a bit of history since they were both in Vietnam together, as we find out through their dialogue. And because they are into martial arts, they know and recognize other martial arts fighters. So there's a scene where one of the fighters that they recognize is from New Zealand, who tries to be kind of an asshole. And the way Bruce Lee kind of diffuses that situation for the time being is very comical. And, there is a bit of humor throughout this movie. Some of it may be a little unintentional, and I'll get to that in a bit. There is a great match between Lee and a character by the name of O'Hara, who is one of the main henchmen to the villain of the film. And O'Hara has this long scar on his face, which Lee recognizes after hearing a story about what happened to his sister when she died. And when he has to fight O'Hara, he humiliates this guy. And it's kind of fun to watch because you know this guy really has it coming. And there's a moment towards the end of the fight where you see quite a bit of remorse as Lee makes his final death blow. The character of Williams has a very cool fighting style. He doesn't have tons of fight scenes throughout the movie, but when we do get to see him fight in the tournament or outside the tournament, very much like Bruce Lee, he makes it look effortless. Similar to the Williams character, the character of Roper is very sure of himself, he knows how to handle himself, and whenever I rewatch this movie, I'm very impressed by John Saxon in the role. The actor did learn judo back in the 50s and wasn't an expert on the level of Bruce Lee or Jim Kelly, but he kept on doing it into the 60s, and so this movie gave him a chance to showcase his skills of what he did know, and the fact that he can hold his own with somebody like Bolo Young, as we all know from Bloodsport as Chung Lee. It's still very impressive whenever I rewatch it because he makes it look kind of seamless whenever he does take him on in those scenes. I also got to talk about the music score in this movie. The music score in this movie is iconic, and maybe if you haven't seen this movie, you probably heard the music anyways, since it's been sampled by quite a few different musicians throughout the years, mainly a few rappers. But the music score by Lalo Schifrin is one of the best things about this movie and really gives it a heart and soul and a personality. As you watch this movie, you can't help but get really pumped because of the music. And he's done some of the music for a lot of the great movies of the past, movies like Cool Hand Luke, Bullet, of which I did a review on recently. And I also have a review of Cool Hand Luke. It is one of my all-time favorites. He did the music for the Dirty Harry movies, except for the third one, The Enforcer. He did the music for the Rush Hour movies. He did the music for the original 1979 The Amityville Horror. He's one of the greatest movie composers in my opinion, and this movie is just another great notch on his belt. There is a standout sequence in the film where Lee infiltrates the main villain's secret underground lair, and if you look closely when all the bad guys are attacking Bruce Lee at that moment, you'll see that one of the guys that comes up behind him is a very young Jackie Chan, and at that moment, the camera kind of zooms in really closely on Bruce Lee, so you don't really get to see what happens to the henchman at that moment. You just kind of hear a crunching sound implying that he gets killed. So, yeah, blink and you'll miss it, but that is basically Jackie Chan getting killed by Bruce Lee in that very moment. As much as I love this movie, I got to talk about some of the fundamental flaws within some of the fight scenes. Because even though the fight scenes are tons of fun to watch, especially when you're watching Jim Kelly or Bruce Lee or John Saxon kicking ass on screen, there are some things that do kind of take me out of the movie, especially on rewatches, since I know a lot of the beats of the action scenes by heart. And so when you have those moments where you see one of the heroes taking on a bunch of bad guys, but you have all the bad guys coming at the hero one at a time, kind of waiting for their turn, it's always a little funny to me, maybe a little inadvertently funny. That's one of the main problems with a lot of these types of movies, is whenever you have a bunch of guys rushing one guy, but there's still a few guys kind of standing there waiting for their turn. And something else that makes me laugh is there's a part where some guy gets kicked, and the edit is a little funny because it cuts to the guy kind of reacting and he just kind of flails himself back through a glass window. Stuff like that always kind of takes me out of the movie for a second. Because this movie was so well made, this movie still holds up very well. It's an entertaining movie. It is a fun movie. Its influence is still felt to this day. It's a movie that I highly recommend anybody that enjoys a good action film to check out. I give this movie 3 stars, and I highly recommend you look this up on streaming. You can find it on Max. I've seen it on there before. I'm sure it's on other streaming services from time to time. But like I'm always saying, get yourself a hard copy before they're all gone. You know, one day we won't have them anymore. So at least that's what they say. So, you know, this is my copy of the Blu-ray. Isn't that a great cover? That is the classic Enter the Dragon cover right there. Every now and then they keep changing the covers of some of our beloved classics. So I'm glad that they stuck with this original cover for this Blu-ray. And I really love this Blu-ray because it has some really awesome behind the scenes special features. Thank you all very much for watching this classic movie review. I very much appreciate it. If you're a new viewer, I appreciate you watching. And if you're into classic movies, hit the bell, become a subscriber. If you're a new viewer, thank you very much for your support. I appreciate you watching. Please don't forget to comment, share, leave a like if you like the video. And please, everybody, look out for the next classic movie review. Thank you all very much. Take care of each other. God bless and peace out.